filter in, but that's totally fine. And we do record these sessions in case somebody misses it and wants to reference it later. So appreciate everybody having, or you having your video on, Prabha. So for those of you guys that are joining for the first time, welcome. We feature experts in tech every single week to give you insight into various technology careers. Today, specifically,
if you weren't awake before, you're certainly awake now.
That's true.
Sorry about that.
And we'll be muting people, by the way, as they filter in here. We're at about 18 folks now. And so if you're on mute and you're surprised, that's just how we do it, so that there's no distractions throughout. But yes, every week we feature experts in tech. Today, specifically, we're going to be talking about, how it is to work at a big technology company like Facebook. And actually, Prabha, who will talk about her background in about a minute, interned at Microsoft as well. And we will have part of the conversation focused on what it's like to be a product marketing manager at this role. If you're calling in from our class, from the summer program that we're running, we obviously talked about, Corey talked about product marketing yesterday. And so this is going to give us a little bit of insight into what it's like at a different company, obviously Facebook. And so, Sergey, anything else?
No, just that, again, for new folks, thank you so much for joining us for this session. And Prabha, thank you so much for offering your time. We started School16 because we believe the best way to learn about jobs in tech is directly from the people that do them, right? You can't read about it. You can't really read about it in a book and get the same experience. And that's why we're really excited to have Prabha here. And that's why we run all the programs that we do for people that do want to get into tech or level up their careers and explore other opportunities in technology. So that's about all we have.
Yep. And by the way, if it's your first time here, we use chat pretty extensively throughout the session. So if it is your first time here, if you don't mind, just throw in the chat why you're here or what you came here to learn, and that might help guide some questions along the way. And then, of course, as we're having this discussion with Prabha, if you have any questions that come up about anything at all, please drop that into the chat, and we'll try to make sure to cover it during the session. Okay? Awesome. So we're going to stop sharing our screen right now. And Prabha, really great to have you here. We're going to start this session like we do with all of them. And if you can, in your own words, just talk us through a little bit about your background and your bio. I already told some folks that were here earlier that, you know, we both spent a bunch of time in Massachusetts, and you did go to our rival school, Babson. We went to Bentley, both B schools with B letter names. But yeah, if you could just tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are right now as a product marketing manager at Facebook.
Yeah, of course. First of all, thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here with you guys and just to share more about my journey. So I always tell people that I fell into product marketing. I think that, you know, when I was early on in my career and I was still at Babson College, I really had no idea what I wanted to do. I, like many other people, came to business school convinced I was going to go into finance. Took a couple courses, realized it really wasn't for me. Ended up sort of being in the state of like, what did I want to do? What kind of made sense for my career? And so I spent a lot of time reflecting and looking at different work experiences I had had and things I had done. And I realized that, like, for me, I really couldn't spend all day, you know, at my computer crunching numbers. I couldn't just like be a math person. I really needed to like work with people. I really wanted to, you know, set the strategy for something. I wanted to build something meaningful. And that's like what I knew I was looking for. I obviously didn't know what that translated to. And so I spent a lot of time, you know, the summer after my junior year, just applying to all sorts of roles. Ended up getting an internship at Microsoft doing product marketing. Had no idea what it was, but the interview process was so fun. I remember during the interviewer was asking me really interesting questions about like how I would tackle this problem or how I would tackle this other problem. And I just really liked solving the problems. And so I took the job because I was like, it was a fun interview. It seemed like it would be an interesting role. And ended up loving it. I think product marketing is such a unique role because, you know, you really get to sit at the intersection of being creative, but also still having like a strategic mindset. And so that's kind of how I ended up at Microsoft. After my Microsoft experience, I wanted to work somewhere where things just moved a little bit quicker. And so applied to Facebook and ended up getting into that, into a rotational program there. So I've been at Facebook for almost 2 years now. Spent my first year on the Facebook groups team. And now I actually work on Facebook dating, which is essentially like this one of the startup companies within Facebook. We're kind of like a newer product, haven't really gained product market fit. So it's really fun from a marketing perspective, because we really get to do like things that not everyone at the company gets to do. So that's kind of how I ended up here at Facebook.
Interesting. I found it interesting that you said that while you were going through the experience on Microsoft, you actually had fun
Yeah.
during that process. I don't hear that often. Most people associate anxiety with the interview process. Can you talk about, obviously if you had fun, you must have felt pretty confident about the process and even being ready for it. So how did you prepare for those interviews, and I guess specifically for the one at Microsoft, to make sure that you can knock it out of the park?
Totally. Yeah. So I think, if product sort of roles are what you're looking at, they definitely require a different type of preparation than like your traditional interview. If you think about, like typical interviews, you always like to prepare for behavioral questions, knowing your resume, how you talk about yourself. Those are all definitely important. But when you're looking at product roles, what you also want to know is like how does the company think about its products? How are they performing? What different audiences are they going after? What's working and what's not working? And it's okay if, sometimes you walk into an interview and they ask you about a product you have no idea about, but just as much as you can prep for that is really, really important. Because, for me, and this is similar even for PM roles where, like they'll ask you, like, imagine you're the product marketing manager for Facebook Watch. How will you double user base in 6 months? In order to answer a question like that, you definitely have to have like some foundation of like what the products are, like where are like the pros and cons of each one. And so I spend a lot of time just like reading through like company websites, reading through the news, reading through like 10K reports, and just getting like a really deep understanding of like where the company is and where like the opportunities, because that's really how you can help inform your answers for some of those like tougher product questions.
Interesting. So when you're in that scenario and they're asking this almost like a case question, do they give you time to prepare? Do they leave the room and you kind of write down your thoughts? Can you use resources, or is it just kind of all from the head?
Yeah, not so much. I would say like they're definitely in the room with you. But you can always ask like follow-up questions. So like I remember once during my Facebook interview, I was asked about like being the product marketing manager for cultural moments, which at the time I literally had no idea what that product was. So I asked a lot of questions just to begin with of like, okay, so like what is this product trying to do? Like who are we trying to target? What's the success been? And it's okay to ask those clarifying questions, because even if you look at like a product like Watch or Marketplace, which is like more well known, there's so many like sub pillars or sub features that like we think about at Facebook that you might not be aware of. So just like asking those clarifying questions is really important, because that'll help you get to like the root of what they're actually trying to ask you. And at that point, it's okay to sort of, give it a minute or two and be like, can I just take a moment to like write down a couple thoughts and just like collect yourself and then sort of answer the question from there.
Interesting. Now, when you were going through that experience, at the very least at Microsoft, obviously you didn't have any background in product marketing. So what do you think, aside from the preparation work that you did right before analyzing 10K reports, I'm pretty sure nobody really does that, or at least clearly the best people do, the ones that get the role, but most people wouldn't even think to do that. What else do you think in your background prepared you to handle those questions well?
Yeah, I always tell people that I think one of the benefits of going to business school is like you learn a lot of soft skills. And I think for me, like one of the biggest things I took away from college was being able to like think on my feet and under pressure. Just given like the number of presentations I gave and like the number of group projects I worked on, like literally just getting used to standing in front of people and having them ask you really tough questions, I think is like one of the best skills you can develop. Because really what at the core of it, they're just trying to test you under pressure. At the end of the day, like I think like what you say is not as important as how you say it. And so I think like that was one like really, really crucial skill that I learned in college, was just like thinking on my feet, being articulate. And that I think is really what helped me through these interviews.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience after you graduated? Because, you know, you had this great tech company on your resume, but you decided not, at least from my purview on your LinkedIn, go directly to working in tech. So talk about the sort of detour that you took.
Yeah, sorry, are you talking about the
You're not.
nonprofit that I worked on?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So when I was a sophomore in college, I started a nonprofit, which basically is a crowdfunding platform for women entrepreneurs in developing countries to start small scale businesses. Which you might be thinking, like, how does someone who is running a nonprofit end up at Facebook? It is like a very interesting story. I personally have a lot of passion for the social impact space. Momentum was actually my second nonprofit. I started my first one in high school, and I learned a lot from it. I think the second time around, like I learned a lot about like what skills actually like I thought I was lacking as a founder. And I really think the biggest one that stood out to me personally was like my ability to be a marketer. Because if I really think back to what we did with this nonprofit, we really just sort of like had in our mind that, okay, like we're building a crowdfunding platform for women entrepreneurs. People are just going to want to donate. Like it didn't even occur to us that like it was going to be hard to bring people to the platform. And definitely, I think a note to like how naive we were as college sophomores. But it was a really good learning, and I think that was kind of why I ended up at Facebook. Was I really wanted to like learn from the best people, and I always kind of felt like marketing was something that I just needed to like hone in on more and understand. So that's kind of why I ended up here, and I think like that experience was really helpful, because even when I was going through like interviews or like anything like that, that was almost like the number one thing I would get asked about, that I also feel like helped me stand out. Because I didn't just have like your traditional like internships. I had like this really interesting, passion project that I cared so much about, which I feel like added another element from like the recruiting standpoint.
Interesting. So then you would say probably the nonprofit that you ran, that background even had more weight on your resume than your internship at Microsoft.
Yeah, I think they were both really helpful. I think like product marketing is a tough like field to get into. I think especially in like the past 2 years, like what I've seen is it's just becoming a more like elevated role in terms of like the years of experience that are needed. And now like, even if you were to try to look at a role at a lot of these tech companies, like most of them will require at least 4 years of experience to just like get into like the entry level roles. So obviously, I think having some of that product marketing experience helped me. And then also because I think I was going after like a specific new grad program, the bar was set a little bit lower. And so it was just more about like standing out, which is definitely where I think my nonprofit experience helped me.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it may not sound obvious because it's a nonprofit, but really you built and launched a product from scratch. You did the product management side and the product marketing and marketing side as well. So you kind of had all the roles at once. Can you talk a little bit about, if you recall, the kind of stories you told about that experience that convinced people that you actually developed that skill set?
Yeah. I actually think the biggest thing that helped me through that process was actually honing in on like the people stories. Like the inspiration for this nonprofit actually came from a summer project I did my freshman year, where I went out and I just like talked to women entrepreneurs to just sort of understand like how they were starting businesses, like what was the impact of them. And I actually went to like rural India to talk to these women entrepreneurs and like meet with them. And so whenever I would tell anyone about Momentum, I still to this day will always talk about the women that I met, because like they were totally the inspiration behind it. And I really actually feel like that was one thing that helped me a lot during the interviews, was that I can't even tell you how many times I would be in an interview and someone would be like, oh, like my cousin, runs XYZ organization, or, so and so. And so that really helped. And then I think the second part is exactly what you said. Like, obviously I got to, design this platform from scratch, to build it, to find the partnerships, to market it. Like that was everything that I worked on, which I definitely think was helpful.
Yeah, that's really cool. Any marketer or product managers sort of reaction, like they would, I'm sure they loved hearing that you actually went out there and talked directly to the customers, because that's half the job, right? Um,
Totally, exactly. We love research.
I'm curious, so it sounds like you were able to stand out during that process, during that interview process with Facebook, but what about before even the interview? Because again, like how did you position yourself when you applied, or did you just apply, or did you do something else to
Yeah.
stand out? Because again, not obvious. You didn't have that much of a tech background, just on paper at least, or if you just look at your LinkedIn. How did you mitigate that?
Yeah, I actually think one of the biggest things to think about if you're going after tech, especially as someone who may not have as much experience, um, is to really think about like the core skills of the role that you're applying to and how you can kind of reframe your current experiences to align with that. Because the reality is like there's a reason why you want to go into like a certain role, and there you must have gotten like some taste of that role in a previous experience, whether it was working across different functions, whether it was like analyzing, XYZ metrics, like there was something that you did that kind of is pushing you into this direction. So I think a big part of it is thinking through like, okay, if I'm looking at product marketing, like I really want to be data driven. I really want to show that I work really well with other people. I want to show that like, I'm able to like set a vision for something and execute against it. And like there are past experiences I had, which even though it wasn't like in tech, it aligned with those skills. And so I think that is really a big part of it, is like analyzing the job description, understanding like what are the skills they're looking for, and then reframing your past experiences to help align with that.
And for you, did you just apply and they picked you like at the top and you went through the process?
Yeah, so I actually my other really big tip is do not apply unless you have a referral. Mainly because like I think especially now like these companies are just getting inundated with applications, and they will look at your application at some point. But if you really want to like put your foot in like and be in really the best place, having a referral is crucial, because most of the time, at least if you have a referral, a recruiter will definitely look at your resume. And if you align with at least like the base requirements of the job, most of the people I refer who meet that criteria will almost always get a first round interview. And so a referral I think is absolutely crucial. You might be asking yourself like, how can I get a referral? My biggest tip would be to think through like, where are certain areas or experiences you've had that you can connect with someone else. So like for me, every person that's ever given me a referral has actually come from my college. And that has been a huge help for me, is just like reaching out to alumni who work at these companies and leveraging those connections. If that's not the case for you, I'm sure that like, whether it's like a company that you've worked at that, that person might have worked at previously, or like a college organization maybe that the two of you are part of, like try to look through LinkedIn and find someone that you have some sort of connection with, and write them a very specific LinkedIn note. So if you're going to send them a connection request, make sure you attach a message with it, and say something along the lines of, hey, like I'm so-and-so, I'm really interested in this position at your company. I also noticed that you happen to be a member of Delta Sigma Pi. I would love to just like chat with you and learn more about your experience. And I've always found like through those intro calls, like especially if you ask the person a lot about themselves and you just connect, they're almost always willing to give you a referral, because like most people get a bonus for referring people. So like they want people to refer. So just like keep that in mind as like you're navigating that.
I love what you said. Actually, it might sound nuanced, but asking people about their background, being inquisitive, people will, I mentioned this on these calls before, how to win friends and influence people, right? People love hearing about themselves, and
Totally.
they walk away from the conversation liking you because you were inquisitive about them.
100%.
Now, how did you navigate the ask? Did you ask at the end of the conversation for a referral?
Yeah.
Did you email them? And did you ask like, refer me to anybody or specific people? How'd you do that?
Totally. So I'm a proponent of like reading the situation. So I can't give you like a specific answer. I can tell you that there's definitely certain times I've been on a call and I can tell it's not going well, in which case like I'm not going to ask. But you can tell if the conversation is going well. The way that I kind of tee it up is I'll say, recruiting at this company is obviously challenging. Like there's so many people who are trying to like get their foot in their door and like trying to get seen. What can I do that'll help me stand out? And most people who you ask that question will say like, you need a referral to stand out. And if you have some sort of connection with them, most of the time that person will say, I'm happy to refer you. So it's just sort of about like setting up the conversation in a way that like gets you there. And you definitely want to start off, like you guys mentioned, just like being inquisitive and asking about themselves so that when you get to the end and you're trying to like make that ask, it doesn't come out of like nowhere. It feels like, it's just a natural progression of the conversation.
Very interesting. I like that advice at all. Actually, you're really, we always talk about how recruiting yourself into a company is obviously selling yourself as well.
Totally.
And again, here, what's really smart about what you do is you make the ask, but you kind of do it almost indirectly and make them suggest it.
Yeah.
That way there's not like a ton of pressure. Hey, give me a referral, you're just saying,
yeah,
hey, give me advice.
totally.
I really like that. I want to shift gears just a little bit and actually talk about sort of the next part of the story, which is, you getting into Facebook. You obviously have a pretty deep experience in marketing actually by this point, because you did it for your own nonprofit. You had relevant internships and the like. But what was those early days? What were those early days at Facebook like? Especially you're saying now the last few years, product marketing as a function is probably changed a little bit as well. So what was the onboarding process like at Facebook? Was there any training that you received, and did you kind of hit the ground running as a product marketer?
Totally. So yeah, I think in terms of like official training or onboarding, they obviously have like an orientation day, which is like really fantastic and grounds you in like the company values and really what Facebook is about. But in terms of getting like product marketing onboarding, I think that's the part that's a little bit different. PMs and engineers, they have like a boot camp that they'll go through that kind of like gives them all that context about like how things operate at Facebook. On the product marketing side, we're definitely like a little bit more scrappy. And so for that reason, like I definitely hit the ground running. I remember, I think it was week 2, I was given like a product deprecation for like a product that was used like globally by millions of people. And I remember being like, wow, I really have like no idea what I'm doing. But because of that, I do think that like you get really good about just like figuring things out. And it is like a really steep learning curve. Like I think, you really don't know or like figure out your job until at least like 6 months in. I think at that point I was like, okay, like I get it now. I understand like how things work. But it takes time, and you just have to give yourself that grace that like the first couple months are going to be challenging. And, especially at a company like Facebook where things move so fast. The hardest part is really, I think, just keeping up and like knowing what's happening. And so there was definitely, I think, like a steep learning curve.
So I'm curious. So week 2, you're given this product deprecation. How did you figure it out? I mean, I'm assuming there was a lot of going to other people for help, but do you remember those early days?
Yeah. So I was really lucky. My manager at the time was absolutely fantastic. And so she actually really, really helped me. Like, I remember like 5 p.m. on like a Friday, we were sitting in a conference room, like literally mapping out like what we should do and how we were going to talk about it. And so I think just having like a really good manager is obviously so helpful to just support you through that process. And another thing is that I think the product marketing org in general was just like a really supportive org. So like I pinged and, reached out to a lot of people just being like, what would you do in this situation? Like, what tips do you have? I looked at previous documents that product marketers had made to like plan the deprecations, or like what was the structure they had used. So I think it's always important to remember that like you're not like trying to rebuild the wheel at all. Like there's a lot out there that you can leverage, whether it's people or resources, documents. And so especially when you're early on, like it's just so important to lean on those because there's people who've done it and there's people who have like a lot of good resources. And so that really helped me out.
And, at this point, once you were in there for, let's say, a few months, you said it takes about 6 months to be, I guess, fully productive. But the question that comes to mind for me is, what's your manager actually assigning you in that time? Like if you don't know what you don't know, and if you're not really sure what to do yet, do you have like specific tasks and goals that you're executing against right away, or is it a little bit more passive?
Yeah, I think there definitely are like specific things that like you're meant to execute on, and like you're given very distinct projects or launches or whatever it is that like need to be worked on. But I do think there is an element of like grace that like you're given, because I think everyone kind of understands the first couple months are really challenging. Things move really fast. There's like a lot of different ways we document information. And so I think that understanding is like really well known across the org. And so that's really helpful, because like even though like you're expected to output and like work on stuff, you still have that element of like I'm not just going to get fired because I don't know what I'm doing. Like there's people who like understand it takes time and who are here to help you, which really helps.
Sorry, I have to unmute myself. So then at this point, you're probably comparing that role to your product marketing experience, even though it was an internship at Microsoft. So what were some things that stood out? What was different about this being at Facebook?
Yeah, I always say that I feel like what I did at Microsoft was like not actually product marketing. I think like it was one of those roles where like they were like, oh, you're all product marketing interns. But like now when I look back to it, I'm like, it really like wasn't product marketing. It was more of like a like business analytics like planning role where like I was doing a lot of like process work and doing like some analytics, and like I still like got some of that like marketing stuff, but I would say like in general, like the role itself was not like pure product marketing, which is why I think to a certain degree when I came to Facebook, it was really shocking, because at first I was like, wait, like I had a product marketing internship and it was nothing like this. And over time, I think I realized like really the spectrum that exists in product marketing and like where you can sort of sit or exist. And I think like roles at Facebook, and I think some of the roles at Microsoft are like this, that are just like more of like the product marketing side versus more of like the analytical side. But that's why I think it is really important, like when you're going through the interview process, to like really ask those questions about like what does this job look like on a day-to-day basis. Because I think like many other jobs out there, like companies just define things differently, and so like what means product marketing in one place could be totally different at another place.
So then once you did get onboarded on into that role and kind of had a little bit more autonomy and the like, can you talk a little bit about how a role like this and performance in a role like this is actually measured? Like how you know whether you're doing a good job or maybe you're at risk of getting fired, or hopefully not, right? But
Yeah.
how do they measure that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I think one of the great parts about especially working at Facebook, like the company is so feedback oriented. And I remember even during orientation, like they told all of us like feedback is a gift. And I remember being like, oh, that's like a little weird. I've never heard that before. But it really is. Like, I think it's like the only place I've worked at where like I don't have to wait until like a formal performance review to like know how I'm doing. I have like monthly career conversations with my manager. I get ad hoc feedback based on like important presentations or meetings I'm having. And so I think that's actually like one of the best parts about working here, is like you're not swirling in this limbo of like, am I doing well? Am I not doing well? Am I at risk? Like I always know like where I am. And I think another thing that we're starting to do more of is like thinking through like OKRs, and like we try to set them now at like the beginning of the half of like, these are like the projects that I have to execute on. Like this is how we're defining success for these. These are like the metrics we're looking at. And that's also like a really helpful way to kind of like circle back during those career conversations and be like, okay, like this actually went well. Maybe this didn't go so well. Like this is what we can learn from it. Here are the skills that I think you should develop. And so it's been really helpful, like just having that in place.
And so what are some of the specific differences then between how what those OKRs are and the way that you're measured in a product marketing role, let's say, versus a product manager and a marketer that you may be interacting with to get your job done? So what are those some of those specific ways that they measure you?
Sorry, the audio cut out at the end there.
What are some of those specific ways that they actually measure you? What kind of metrics are you guys looking at, or both
Yeah.
quantitative and qualitative methods?
Totally. So I think one of the biggest things that we're gold on as a product marketing team is understanding how we drive product metrics. So like, for example, like on a product like dating, like I'm trying to drive profile signups for Facebook dating. And I do that through like XYZ marketing activities. So that is like a big way quantitatively we measure. That obviously varies per product based on like the metric that team is goaling on. But moving product metrics is a huge thing and a huge thing that we try to do. The secondary part is more like squishy metrics like sentiment or like NPS, stuff that's more around like sentiment and how people like view a product or how they feel about the product. We sometimes go on that depending on like where the product is in their life cycle and like what marketing initiatives we have funded for the half. And then the last piece is typically more like soft skills. So like, for example, if you're early on in your career, like your manager might be wanting you more to like gain leadership visibility. Maybe you try to get like one presentation a half that you do to a VP. Maybe you're trying to do more things internally, like, organize cultural events or team bonding events. Maybe you're trying to just like write more notes and share your learnings to the organization. There's also like a piece of that that's sort of more around like contributing to the organization and like gaining visibility, which is pretty prominent, especially for people who are early on in their career.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that kind of a metric, it makes sense for a larger company like Facebook. And I think that's pretty cool that they measure that. But I'm curious, you mentioned things like profile signups and engagement and how happy the customers are or the users are. How are the lines delineated between you and your team being responsible for that versus the product team that's actually making the design decisions versus the marketing team that's actually trying to drive signups as well through certain marketing activities? Like, how do you know what you're responsible for?
Yeah, so it depends on where we kind of align as a team at the beginning of the half. So like typically if like we're trying to establish like product market fit for an organization, we're trying to probably get X% of people onto the platform. Product can probably like forecast that they're going to bring X% of people onto the platform based on their tactics, which means that there's probably some sort of gap that marketing will try to take on and drive. Obviously there's like so many factors to it based on like how much money we have and like what we can actually execute on based on our bandwidth. But we try to set all those goals off at the beginning of the half to make sure we're aligned and like understand that, okay, product owns this amount, marketing owns this amount. It also could be a scenario where like product knows that they can only get like a certain demographic on platform. And that just might be because of like, the sort of people that are on Facebook to begin with, in which case it might be, okay, marketing is going to go out and try to get, 18-year-olds who might not be as active on our platform. And we're going to do that by doing, XYZ things that aren't on Facebook to help bring them on. So there also could be an element of that, of like us going after a different demographic based on what our priority is.
I'm curious because earlier on in the conversation, you said that you've been at Facebook for a couple of years and you were put on a rotation program. So correct me if I'm wrong, you're working on Facebook dating now. How often do they switch things up? I guess put you on a new product. And have you noticed any big differences? Like this Facebook dating team or experience is very different than what I did my first.
Yeah. So officially, you should only rotate twice through the program. It's a 2-year program and you should start on a team and then you rotate halfway through. And then at the end, you can choose to stay or rotate again. Unofficially, we just tend to get moved around a lot just because like things are always changing. And so, for us, like for me, I think I've had 6 different managers during my time at Facebook. So I've moved to like different sub teams, even though I've always been on like the overarching thing of groups, for example, like I've moved to different managers and worked on different projects. And that tends to happen like every couple of months, which I think is actually kind of helpful because in a way, like you just gain a lot of experience, you meet a lot of people and like it keeps you on your toes, which is really helpful. But the official answer is that it should only be like twice.
Yeah, we won't tell anyone.
But isn't it also frustrating because you might get used to how a certain manager works and then all of a sudden they put you on another team?
Yeah. So I think that is the tricky part sometimes is I think the tough part for me sometimes is just like the career continuity. And so sometimes, like I could be on a team really gelling well with a manager. They might have a certain perspective of where I'm going to end up with my career and what that path looks like. And then that might change based on another manager. So that is definitely something that is not the most ideal state. But I do think that it has helped me just meet a lot of people and like work on a lot of really cool things, which is something I really appreciate.
Mm. And then what happens after the 2 years?
So you either get to stay on the same team, or you can choose to move to a new team. And I personally actually really like my team, so I think I'm going to stay, but you definitely have options, which is nice.
Cool. So let's talk about your team, or more specifically, I want to get a sense of sort of day in the life now. You're a couple of years into your role, and how long have you been working on Facebook dating?
Since September of 2019.
Okay, and that's probably around the time they launched, right?
In the US, yes, but we were in other countries before that.
Ah, very cool. So you had some data to work off of when you came into the role. Yeah. So can you talk us through, and it could even be a day like today, what happens when you get in the office, in this case, when you get into Slack or whatever your setup is at home, but walk us through what you typically do in a given day.
Yeah, so I always joke and say like a lot of my job is like what I call stakeholder alignment, which like you might hear a lot in the product world. It's just a lot of like getting people on the same page. And what that really means on a day-to-day basis is I really spend most of my day in meetings. So I pretty much will start my day around like 8. I try to like get in a good hour and a half of work before my meetings start, typically at like 9:30 or 10. Meetings will go from like 10 to 12. I'll typically have like an hour off for lunch, and I'll try to use that to get some work done as well. And then again, we'll have meetings typically from like 1 to 4:30. And then again, we'll try to use like another hour and a half to like get things done. So I would say like I do spend most of my day in meetings. And I think it's kind of like on either end of the day is when I get most of my like real good time to actually like get stuff done. But yeah.
Got it. So then give us a few examples, if you can, of the get stuff done portion. Because I'm assuming when somebody says I want to be a product marketer, they actually want to do that stuff, less so in the meetings. But hey, that's life, especially in a big company. A lot of
yes. Yeah, so I would say it depends on the project I'm working on. But like, for example, product launches, which are a really big part of being a product marketer. If you're working on something like that, you might be like pulling together the go-to-market strategy. So like what messaging are you going to use? What target audiences are you going to go after? What channels are you going to activate on? What is like our communication strategy? Are we going to work with press at all? Are we going to use any like executives to help us talk about this product launch? Do we need any assets for it? How are we going to like create those assets? Do we do that with our internal creative team? Do we work with an agency? Those are kind of like the things that happen during that like get stuff done period of like, okay, like what's our strategy? How are we going to execute it? How am I going to sell that to someone? Because I think honestly, one of the biggest parts of being a product marketer is not just like setting the vision, but how do you actually get like your whole cross-functional team around you of, your creative team, your marketing research team, your media planning team, your decision science team, all these people who like you work with on a launch, like how do you get them behind your vision? And so that could be maybe like a really well created document. It could be a really good deck. It kind of depends on like what you're working on, but a lot of time is kind of spent on formulating that because you want to have a really strong story, because that's really what's going to get people to like get behind your vision.
Yeah, which sounds like it's probably one of the hardest parts of the job. I'm curious. I'm curious. What part of those different activities? What part of those different activities are the most autonomous, where you get to make a decision of your own versus the team has to make a decision as a team, or somebody really senior has to make it?
Yeah. So I think one of the nice things about Facebook is that it is really like bottoms up. So in the sense that like, if I do want to deprecate or like launch something, like I do get to like make the call on like what I think the strategy should be, like what the messaging should be, like who we're going to target. Obviously very much reliant on like our partners who maybe have like done the research or like are going to make the media buy, and like they have obviously more insight into like how we might tweak that. But I would say as like a product marketer, like you build that strategy and like you kind of stand behind it. Depending on like the level of funding, like if you're looking at like a big product launch, you might really want to like take that to leadership and get them to approve on it. In which case they might be like, okay, like I don't actually think this channel makes sense, or like I don't think this measurement strategy makes sense, and you might have to like adapt like you would at any other company. But I do think that you have a lot of say in like building that proposal and strategy, which is really great.
You know, some of the activities and responsibilities that you reference at other companies, I think would fall under the product management umbrella. How's that delineated in Facebook? Are PMs like more so closely tied with engineering, for example? How does that work?
Yeah, so I would say it really depends. And I'm so sorry. I can't figure out how to turn on Do Not Disturb on my new computer. So sorry, guys. I really apologize. I can't figure it out. But I would say the biggest thing is that it's really a scale. So I would say it really depends on the product team you're on. For me right now, the team I'm on, the PM is absolutely fantastic and has such a deep-seated role with the engineering team. And so what that means is actually like I don't need to be as involved on the product side. I need to be more involved with the marketing stakeholders and make sure everyone is behind that and really excited about like what we're pitching and proposing. However, I've been on teams in the past where actually you do need to sit closer to product. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? Everything just went black.
Yep, we're
okay. Okay, cool. I also have been on teams where like you have to sit really close to product and you do have to like work really closely with engineers. So I think that's one of the benefits of being part of the rotational program is getting to fluctuate between that. I've had experiences where I do take on a lot of roles of the PM and I'm trying to think through like, how do we grow a product? How do we drive acquisition? How do we get profile creations even in product? And I have sit on the other end where it's like more creating like creative assets, making ad campaigns, things like that. So it's definitely a spectrum, I would say.
Can you, I want to address, and by the way, folks, we have another 10 minutes or so left of the conversation. So if you have questions that are coming up or coming to mind, please drop them into the chat now. But I want to address Abhijit's question, which we kind of touched on earlier, but maybe we can go through a specific example. Can you think about a recent campaign that you did on for Facebook dating, and how was the effectiveness of that campaign measured?
Yeah. So I think a great one was when we went out in the US, September of last year. We were really thinking through like, how do we make this a cool product? Especially if you're thinking about like the dating app landscape, which is super crowded. And there's really well-known players like Bumble, Hinge, Tinder that do a lot of really like pushing the envelope marketing, I would say. We were like, okay, how do we get out there and how do we really like drive profile signups? The traditional way of doing this, which we've always done as a marketing team, are ad campaigns. So like running ads on Facebook, running ads on, Hulu, Spotify, things like that. But we saw an opportunity to actually work with influencers last year. And so I got to build dating's first ever influencer program, which was a lot of fun. We partnered with over 6 different influencers across the US. We tested big influencers, smaller influencers. And each one of them essentially had like a unique link that would take you into Facebook dating. And that was sort of how we tracked, okay, this influencer was able to drive this number of profile signups and this influencer drove this percent of profile signups. So in the end, the whole program drove a 7% incremental increase in profile signups, which was really good. Based on previous sort of marketing efforts that we've done. And so it kind of showed itself as like a really cool and unique channel that we could do. And I think, like I was mentioned earlier, like that's one of the fun parts about being on this marketing team, because like we get to do things that like other teams can't necessarily do just because we're newer. And so it was actually one of the first times that Facebook has done an influencer program. And so it was so much fun, like learning it and building it. And obviously it had really strong results as well. So that was one of the most recent ones that I've gotten to work on. That was really fun.
That sounds great. I love that they let you experiment with that type of stuff. And obviously that's part of the reason why one would want to go into a role like that. I want to address Jenny's question, which is there a common career path and trajectory for product marketers? Obviously you talked about the fact that marketing experience is very helpful, but what would you say about like product marketing specifically? Because it's going to be a little different than a general marketing role. So if you were going to say if there was a common path to that, how would you define it?
Maybe it's based on like your familiarity with your colleagues' backgrounds
Yeah, totally. I would say, honestly, one of the biggest things that I see are people coming from agencies. So a lot of people will start their careers off working at one of like the big digital or marketing agencies. They'll spend a couple years there, and then they typically will transition into a role like product marketing. That I would say is like one of the biggest feeders for these roles, especially like I said, because the minimum years of experience is about 4 years. So it's like a good place to start and like get an understanding of like what marketing is, build your connections, things like that. The other path that is pretty prevalent is also consulting, which is similar to product management. Like a lot of people end up in product management from going through the consulting field. Similarly, like people will go into consulting and then eventually transition into a role like product marketing at a tech company.
Makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious, obviously you said that you're pretty happy with your team, which is awesome to hear, and you're thinking about staying on. But generally, now that you've been in this role for a couple of years, I'm not going to be as glib as to say what's your 5-year career plan, but what is your 5-year career plan, or what is your plan for the future? What do you think would be a great next step for you?
I bet you're going to be a founder again.
Yeah. Yes, that's what I was gonna say. You read my mind. I do eventually want to start another company. I've always kind of viewed like these early years as like the best time to just like learn a lot and absorb as much information as possible. And like that was always the one thing I optimized for, regardless of like pay or anything like that. So yeah, I do eventually want to become another founder. But like, I feel like if I still feel like I'm learning a lot, if I still feel like the people around me are really fantastic and I feel really supported, like I don't really see a reason to leave. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking, but it's always a tough question. I mean, who knows? I couldn't have planned 2020, honestly. So things change.
That's fair.
But what if, say, Twitter came to you with a great offer to lead up a product marketing team? And I'm assuming now that you've been in a couple of big tech companies, other big tech companies, I mean, they do a lot of poaching. What would make you consider another big tech company?
I think it would have to really be for a product I care about. Like if I think about the experiences I've had here at Facebook, like the ones that I've loved working on the most are the products or features that have the most impact in people's lives. And so that's why, like, if I were to look at another role, I could never work on something that I think was like B2B. I would really have to work on a product where is like a consumer facing product, and B, I feel like is like meaningfully helping people's lives. Cause I feel like I can't move away from that social impact side. I keep getting pulled back. So it would really have to be something like that.
Now, do you think if you start your own company, do you think it's going to be likely to be a tech company? And if so, do you have any amazing ideas that you want to share with us?
I don't think it would be a tech company. I think it would be, I mean, this is what I'm thinking right now, but I really would love to start like a women focused consumer goods company. That's just something that I like ever since I, have been in that space. It's something that like I really wanted to try doing. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about right now, but obviously there's so much opportunity in tech too. So, who knows?
That's exciting. And I actually, I know a lot of, or I know several founders that are building women-focused consumer companies. So if you ever want to talk to them, hit me up. But
yeah, I will. Thank you.
That's exciting. And folks, anybody here on the call, do you have any final thoughts or questions? This is your last chance to ask Prabha a question. Type it in the chat, and if not, then we'll wrap it up for the evening and let everybody go. Evening for us. You still have a couple hours of work left.
Yeah.
Well, I'm assuming part of the reason why you start at 8 a.m. is because you're depending a little bit on the East Coast, right?
Yeah. Not so much on the East Coast. I like to start early because I like to log off early. Like I'm more of a morning person, so I'm like by like 4 or 5, I like try to sign off. So that's why I like to start a little bit earlier.
Oh, okay. And are they pretty good over there at, giving you some personal space after that and not bothering folks all night?
Yeah, I feel like it's really flexible. Like there's some people on my team that like to work really late. Like I'm not that person. So I typically just sort of like work the hours that make sense for me. And so it's nice to have like that flexibility.
That's great. I feel like that's also like a California thing. I've heard it before where some people get up early and then they finish at 4 or 5. Here in New York, I'm getting slacks at like 7 or 8 sometimes. I'm like, all right,
Oh
I'm
man.
not even looking at this anymore.
Yeah, I totally hear you. I hear you.
Very cool. Oh, we just said very cool at the same time. That's a twin thing.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good place to wrap up. Sir, if you don't mind just throwing up the slides really quickly.
That's right.
But Prabha, thank you so much for sharing your background experience. Super insightful for me because even though I have a few friends that work at Facebook, this is actually, you provide a new insight for me. And I think anybody yeah, for sure. And I think anybody that is excited about marketing or intersection of product and marketing, clearly, at the very least, it seems to me like Facebook's an interesting place to learn. So if you have that potential referral, you should leverage it if you're interested in that role. If you don't, maintain a huge takeaway from our conversation with Prabha is try to figure out ways to build those relationships early to get your foot in the door, because you do need to obviously differentiate yourself from everybody else that is going through the process as well. So
thank you, Prabha. Again, we just showed our screen to show the survey link. We ask for folks to fill it out just because it's really helpful for us to get your feedback. So as many people as would care to fill it out, please do. We're going to send an email after this as well, but you can also just get started on it now. You see the link right there. It takes like a minute or 30 seconds even.
Yep. And if you fill it out, you will get access to this video recording and professional notes.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Prabha.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.
Cheers.
We'll let you get to those meetings and notifications.
Sorry about that, guys. Thanks.
No. Thank you for giving us the hour. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye all.